Hi, I'm Pat Sullivan, co-founder of the Spirit and Work Resource Center in Oakland, California, and author of Work with Meaning, Work with Joy, Bringing Your Spirit to Work in Any Job, and a lot of other articles on spirit and work. I first discovered this calling while I was working for one of the approximately 500 attorneys I've worked for over the ages. Not for 1 nanosecond have I ever wanted to be an attorney. I first began working with attorneys in about 1970 in Washington, D.C. as a way to support my writing habit and as a way to avoid having a full-time permanent job. At that time, lawyers always wanted someone to step in really fast if anyone was going to be out. I developed a stable pretty quickly of 4 or 5 medium-sized law firms that I could call whenever I said, okay, now I need to work a while. The benefit for working with lawyers was they paid better than almost anyone else, and that was probably because they were known to be very picky and tough to work for. To my shock, I discovered that law is fascinating. I really love it. I've eventually done paralegal work primarily in the field of labor law, which fits right in with my primary interest is on work. I came out to California from Washington, D.C. in 1987 to take a master's degree program in spirituality and psychology in a program that was headed by Matthew Fox, who's really become primarily known around spirituality and work. This was just before he wrote that particular book. And during the program, I did a master's thesis on vision. How is it that people get a clear vision of what calls them in life, and how do they create what they're called to do with really great integrity, being true to themselves and on line with others? I thought when I graduated from grad school that I would very, very easily just build up a business, and meanwhile my husband would get a job, and while he was discovering what he was really called to do. He's a former priest in a monastic order. That didn't work. I thought I would easily get a lot of technical writing work like I had done in D.C. That didn't happen. I ended up falling back on legal work again because I'd done so much of it in D.C. I decided after a while that rather than do paralegal work, I would do legal secretarial work for the simple reason that it usually paid better and it was easier to get away at 5, so that I could really put my time and energy on doing what I had developed in grad school, wanted to build it as a business. In about 1990, I took a full-time permanent job for a very high-stress, high-profile corporate law firm in San Francisco. It was rough, it was tough. I floated, which meant I worked for practically everyone in the firm, which would have been about 200 people over the 5 years I was there. And before that, I'd already worked for several hundred lawyers over the years of floating in and out, sometimes for a day, sometimes for a week, sometimes for a month. It was a tough time. It wasn't just that there was a lot of stress at the firm, but John was out of work, my husband, and we went through 4 deaths in 3 years, all except one on the East Coast, which meant that during that time, I had to tap into everything I'd ever learned spiritually and psychologically to get through the day. And there were some days that the only reason I could think for going, the only motivation was I have to be able to stay efficient enough not to get downsized. The firm went through 3 downsizings. And I had to do a lot of overtime, because we had to earn a lot of extra money to keep flying back and forth to the East Coast. All my vacation periods at that time went to take care of my stepmother, who was dying with cancer. As I said, I had to really dig deeply into my spirituality to get through the days. And one of the shocks of my life was that as I did that, I not only found resilience and the strength to do the work well, in spite of hard times, but I also found that the legal work gave me a structure to my life in those hard times that surprised me. I started finding the heart and soul of law in that firm. I found that I had plenty of kindred spirits. One Christmas, when everyone who was dying had died, And I was feeling a lot of grief still particularly from my stepmother's death. But I also was feeling a sense of freedom. There was a time we were getting ready for the Christmas party at the firm, and I had to rush back from San Francisco to Oakland to buy presents for Toys for Tot, that was the admission ticket to the party. And had arranged to get off early. Instead, just as I was leaving, one of the senior partners yelled at me, "Pat, come here." And I thought, how rude. This is really rude. And she knows I'm supposed to be getting out of here early. What does she want? And I really had some nasty thoughts. So I go into her office. She's on the telephone. She's talking to a client. She just points like this to the left. And to the left is just the window. That's not where she normally puts work, whatever she needs. I finally went to the left where she was pointing, and there over San Francisco Bay was this just amazing rainbow. It was clear and sparkling and huge. I looked back at her, and she grinned while she's still talking to her client on some labor negotiation. And it was like at that moment, the stress and the tension and the pain just went away, and my heart opened up after the grief and the pain of losing Violet. And I stood there the longest time, and I felt ashamed of myself. I went, oh my God, the first rule of law, and the first rule of many spiritual practices, don't assume. Open your eyes, be receptive to what is. Don't judge it. Listen, pay attention. And the first thing I had done when the partner had called me was judge her harshly. And then I just remembered that prayer of Meister Eckhart that says, if the only prayer you have is thank you, that's enough. For the first time in my life, I started having deep gratitude for law and to be able to work for lawyers, even in a big, tough law firm. I had one of those timeless moments that people talk about when they're really in a deep meditation. There was just an incredible sense of spaciousness. I was crying. I could hear in the background the lawyer still talking to her very well-known company. There was just this sense of holy, sacred moment. And I began to meditate right there about the heart and soul of law. And it was like one of those moments where a lot is opening up that you just can't get right then, but you'll stay with it. Next thing I did was go back to my desk. And I sat down and prayed. People were walking all around. They were going on. They were either rushing around to finish stuff or to get ready to go for the party. And I happened to have in my purse invitations to a solstice gathering, which is a pretty primal gathering to honor the change of the seasons and the darkness of the month. And something we always did to get right down into the practice of emptiness, the practice of honoring the darkness and the wisdom that can be there when you let everything go. And out of my meditation came this very clear voice to go invite one of the attorneys, who is the most conservative that I knew in that firm, the one who was most likely, I thought, to just think this was really something very awful. But I paid attention to it. I went down and I knocked on his door, and he gruffly said, hello. And he'd been one very, very difficult to work for lately, unusually. So I told him about the solstice and invited him, kind of trembling. And then he smiled at me and he said, I really need this. He said, my mother-in-law is dying and my wife's been trying to hold everything together. This sounds wonderful. And he says, I can't go, but I'm so grateful you gave me the invitation. And he says, I'm sorry for being such a grouch lately, but that's what's going on. I've had a lot of things like that happen over the last 12 years around law. And I've always found that when I get beyond the surface of it's this or it's that and just pay attention, get to know people, then everything opens up. And I have really been blessed to see the very rich soul of law. It's hard. I know that law is holy in its roots, as is every profession. I haven't yet found a profession that's honest, that doesn't have a heart and soul. But law, I see, is really a calling to help create and restore justice. It's a calling to help people get very, very clear about what they want to create, whether it's a business, a nonprofit, a joint venture, whatever it is, to stop, take off the rosy-colored glasses and say, okay, what is this I want to create? What is needed to make this work well? What could go wrong so I can, build in clarity, so I can build in procedures to give it the best shot of doing it? How can I start off cleanly with someone? How can I build an absolutely wonderful relationship through accountability and clarity about who is going to do what? How can we deal with each other when one of us goes off track? How can we deal with other nations, other individuals? It's a real holy work. And I'm excited by the heart and soul of law. I'm really excited about it. I want to go back right now to the turning point, Christmas '94. After that time when I was shown the rainbow and had the nerve to knock on the door of that most conservative attorney, I lost my fear of speaking about what mattered to me in any situation. I'm pretty fearless now. I'm willing to talk about things such as meaning and integrity and joy with almost anybody. If they don't want to talk, that's fine. They can, don't have to talk. But I'm willing to be on the record for what matters to me and to create ways to talk with people about matters of meaning. And I know this matters. The next thing that happened was shortly after that, John got a job as being a research director on the first ever major directory of spirituality and work. And we had never heard the term, and immediately it resonated because that's what I had grown up with. My parents were teachers and they loved their work. My parents were models of integrity. My dad, when I was only 6 months old, caught a college president embezzling. And he was one of several who blew the whistle, a great personal and career sacrifice. It's something he never regretted. And as it took many decades to really deal with all of that whistleblowing, the only thing that he was left with was, in terms of pain, was he always said, I wish someone had gone up to the college president and said, no, Dr. Meadows, you can't do this. He said if they had only done that when the wrongdoing was very small, it could have been handled in a very courteous, clean, and calm way and not created this cancerous climate throughout the university that cost a lot of people a lot. And I've never forgot that message. And I've never forgotten, it's something else he told me about integrity. He says, you've always got to be able to listen to the other person and to be willing to be accountable yourself. And he said, I think of people as like the white lines on the road up on the mountains. He said, when you're driving in the mountains and a fog comes in, if you don't slow down, you don't see those lines. And you can either go too far left into oncoming traffic or too far right off the side of the mountain. And he says, so we're there to help each other through ethical fogs. My dad did get to see me write about whistleblowing. He did get to see me do a lot around it. I wish he'd seen all that's happened since the last 10 years, and I've really gotten into spirit and work because so much of what I got in my work came through him. Because John got to be director of the Spirit and Work Directory, Resource Directory, I got to meet, at least by phone or email, all the major players throughout the world in a field that was growing rapidly. It had been starting it's probably been there forever because there have been people like my parents. But for the last, 2.5 decades, people have been getting together in every field and saying, look, there is a heart and soul to this profession. Or how can we deal with the stress and burnout in this profession by bringing spirit to work? How can I do it individually in a company where it doesn't seem to be welcome? How can I bring my values into the workplace rather than leaving them into the parking lot? How can we deal with spirituality and work respectfully and effectively when people come from all types of religions, including atheism, and how do we work with this in a way that's really connecting and honoring wherever we are. So I got fascinated. I went, this is where I belong. This is my field. This is where I got to be. Soon after that, I just started researching spirituality and law on the internet, and I came up with Stuart Levine, who's a mediator here in Oakland. And Stuart's been part of holistic law for probably from the beginning, and very much at the forefront of the mediation area, a lot because mediation's a great field. It's just been driven by values from the beginning. And soon I connected with Steve Kiva of the ABA Journal, and I connected with him through Judy Neal, who founded the Association for Spirit Work. And Judy's one of the chapters in Steve's book because she was a person who blew a whistle at Honeywell and won her suit and became the model for the new client, the person who says, look, I don't want to nail the other person to the wall. I want a closure that has integrity. Soon after that, I wrote a piece in the San Francisco Examiner Chronicle. It was a joint production from the two newspapers. They had a column called Viewpoint where anyone could write. I did. I wrote about spirituality and work. It got a lot of good response. I pitched the editor about doing a column. It ran for 2 years. One of them was, of course, about law. So I did the column aimed to come when Steve Kiva's book on transforming practices was coming out. So I started searching around for other attorneys, because Steve's not an attorney. I started searching for attorneys who could speak openly about spirituality and law. One of the first I was led to was Gary Gwilliam of Oakland, who has been speaking openly about spirit and law for many years. And as he told me then, we've usually been doing it under the guise of stress release, which is the open door. And actually, stress release is the open door for talking about spirit and work in most any field. We could go talk about spirit work all day, but there's many pitfalls and challenges and opportunities, and that's a whole nother subject. So I was really touched by Gary, who was once a gang member in high school, was a really heavy drinker until he turned that life around several decades ago. And I said, boy, if I ever get a chance to work for that firm, I'd love to. Well, I've gotten it. And I still do some paralegal work with Gary, and I just really enjoy it. And it's given me a real picture of what it's like to work for an attorney who really lives his values openly and within a firm that just honors people so much that you feel honored from the moment that you walk in the door through the end of the day. And there really is a sense of family. I've been with a firm on a contract basis for several years, and I keep seeing people who came in to visit, and they worked here years ago as a file clerk or whatever, and then went on to law school, and they've come back to tell what they're going, or they may have worked speaking to new client potentials, and now they're lawyers. They may even be hired here. So I love seeing that really wonderful rhythm that I so rarely saw in other firms of a movement from someone working in part-time and thinking about being a lawyer and seeing it practice at its best, and then moving on into the law or moving on into another field and maintaining that culture of there really is in respect and honor that goes way beyond what you do from 9 to 5. So to meet all these people lawyers who are really committed to the same things and welcome me, even though, as I said, I've never for 1 nanosecond ever wanted to be a lawyer and have not had a single day of law school. And I was made the Director of Integrity, Purpose, and Joy. That was my made-up title, and that's how I was treated. It was just really fun, and I'm so thrilled that people are beginning to see lawyers appreciated more, and I think that's drastically needed. it really pains me to hear the lawyer jokes. It really pains me to hear political candidates make a big deal about, well, I'm not a lawyer. And it feels said that way, very snide. I remember a number of attorneys telling me that they don't like saying, I'm a lawyer when they go say to a party, because they know the first thing they're going to get is a dozen lawyer jokes. And I think the current attitude about lawyers has really invaded our public life. And I think lawyers fall for it. I used to be part of a community called the Pathwork, and they have a lecture there called The Shame of the Higher Self, about how easily we can get embarrassed about our best gifts, how we can be shy about our compassion, about our willingness to think reflectively and be quiet rather than be, oh, I'm so decisive. Or just how much we care about things. And I think lawyers have fallen into that really heavily. Some years ago, when I did a column on Judaism and what it's really given to spirituality and work, I thought about how much the whole Jewish traditions have given to law. I've written quite a bit on that, and just I'm always awed by it. And then someone told me about the ceremony of Simchat Torah, which I hope I've pronounced correctly. It comes after the cycle of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And it's the time of the year when the whole Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, they've been unwound, they've read all the way through the Torah. And so they have the ceremony of rolling it back to the beginning. And there's a moment, I've been told, when someone holds up the Torah and says, thank you, God, for the laws which hold us together. Thank you. It's that binding. And I remember Steve Kiva talking about, I can't remember the name of the person who said that law is like the tissue, it helps hold the tissue of our society together. And I know I'm not quoting it right, but this holds us together. And I started crying when I first heard of that, and I said, we are so overdue for a ceremony of celebrating human law. And so the first time I thought about it and told someone about it, I said, wouldn't it be fun to just really have a ceremony where someone dances down the U.S. Constitution? And people go, wow, thanks God and everyone who helped create it and whatever mysteries helped create it. Thanks for this Constitution that really created a foundation that has been sent around the world. And oh my gosh, it's been eroding. Isn't it time to shore it up? Isn't it time to, what's the word here in California? Retrofit and clean it up and re-anchor it and just dance it down the aisles and the Bill of Rights and other things. And then someone says, well, what about the Code of Civil Procedure? And I think that person meant it as a joke, and then I went, yeah. Because the codes of civil procedure are about the everyday workings of things. And you think about people like the prisoners in Guantanamo Bay, wouldn't they love to have a really good code of civil procedure that was honored? So this is the way I see it, that we honor in this country all the things that helped us develop the foundations for law, an agreed upon law, and all the ways that laws are made. And that means you honor lawyers. And I think it's not just giving lawyers the overdue respect, but it's also respecting what we can get from law. It's saying we really respect a community that's bound together by this. Imperfect as law is, it's the best shot I've ever seen. It's way far better than let's fight each other out. And it's immensely bigger than this, well, let's decide things on the basis of popularity or beauty contest or American Idol contest. Let's base this on integrity and thought and carefulness. Because, at the heart of it, law is about being careful. Law is about taking due diligence. I love that term. Due diligence means you and I are due carefulness to each other in whatever we do. I think that's just the most amazing, spiritual, solid human concept. And I think that's also one of the reasons people don't like law, because people have ideas, things they don't want to deal with. They want to go in the rosy glasses type thing. Let's create this thing, Kim, you and I. Let's just do something, and let's not really think about what could go wrong, because that might make everything go wrong, or let's not take the time to think it through clearly. And law says let's do. Let's take the time to think through very clearly. And I think if we started honoring that and honoring lawyers, one really big thing would happen is we get better law and better lawyers. The field of psychology is so loaded with so much research that when you honor someone, you acknowledge the other, that you invoke and pull out the best in them. When you dishonor them, you get the worst. When John got that job to do the research direction of that Spirituality and Work Resource Guide, it connected me with the Organizational Development Network in the Bay Area. They had a meeting about a year or so before and defined spirit and work as one of the issues they really wanted to deal with. At that time, the whole OD, organizational development, the training fields, had been working for several years with the whole concept of change management, and had come up with the idea that there was no way you could deal with major change in any organization without dealing with more than just the body and the mind people brought to work, that you had to deal with spirituality. They had discovered that there were so many ways you could deal with spirit and work, and the question was, how could you do it in a really great way? So I was invited to join the group to plan for this series of meetings they were going to do, even though I was not yet an OD consultant. So I joined in them, and at one of the meetings, someone was saying, well, how can our meetings be really honoring of spirit and work, and how can they build it? How can the meetings themselves reflect it and honor it and represent it? And I immediately just blurted out, well, we got to have an altar. People always do in workplaces. And someone said, what do you mean? And it was one of those moments where you blurt something out, and then you start thinking about what you've said, and you start thinking about it. And I realized that since I had first started working for lawyers and other places in the 70s in Washington, D.C., in that attempt to avoid a real job, I had noticed that if I was sitting at the desk of someone who was returning, there was almost always something in the desk drawer that spoke to that person. I found a lot of Bibles. I found a few Bhagavad Gitas. I didn't see a Quran at that time. A lot of poetry, a lot of inspirational quotes. And that said to me, these people have a rich spiritual life that's, private. In one of my early jobs, actually before I started working for lawyers, I was temping at a large commercial real estate firm in Washington, D.C. And it felt like going into enemy territory. I had come out of some of the furthest out human potential stuff in the 70s and just had to pay the rent. So I had walked out that morning armored with the Tao of Physics, and I held it kind of like this, which was then fairly new. And so people would politely ask, what are you reading? And I would say the Tao of Physics, it's about blood. And they would almost always cut me off with, that's nice. And I thought, well, nobody really thought much of it, and I'm really out of place here. Within a day or two, though, people started having conversations with me. First one, somebody in the office came up and said, I want to talk to you about something, but you've got to promise not to tell anybody because they wouldn't understand. Okay. And that person told me about his or her spiritual practices and how it related to their work and what they would really rather be doing. By the time I finished that assignment, I think it was about 2 weeks, every person in that office except two, one high executive and one staff person, had gotten me either off-site or behind closed doors to talk about spirituality. Every one of them prefaced the conversation with, I want to talk to you about something, but you've got to promise not to tell anyone because they won't understand. And after about the third conversation, I said, people here would really understand. Oh, no. Well, I said, I'm pretty sure. Oh, no, they wouldn't. So I didn't spill the secret. That came back to me when I was talking about, first had the idea of workplace altars. It also came back to me how much I had gradually seen the progression of things from their hiding places in the desk drawers onto the desktop. So I created an assignment for myself through that OD network, which was to go back to the law firm where I then worked, this big, tough corporate law firm, and other places with my camera and get stories and photos of what people did to keep spirit alive at work. Well, I found an eyeful. It's just under my eyes. And the one that was most shocking was after I had talked to one of the receptionists, who was really acknowledged by almost everyone as the spirit keeper of the whole firm. She says, oh, you've got to go talk to so-and-so, who was one of the senior partners in the labor department. And I thought, him? He's very aloof, and, I've really never had any conversation with him. Though I'd been in his office almost every day for, over the last couple months to put something on his desk or take something off, So I went in and talked to him, again, with trepidation. And he grinned. What he showed me was right to the left side of his desk, which had been there every day and I never noticed, was this collection of books: Bhagavad Gita, Bible, Quran, poetry, black pearls. I don't even remember what all was in there. I've got a photograph of it, just sitting there. And he was telling me that the little tags on it, the little Post-it note colored tags, they were there to mark special passages he left. And he says, look, I look at these when I'm really stressed, or I just like knowing these things. They support me. And he said one time he had a Texas lawyer who was very evangelical Christian and was working on a case with him come look at those, and the guy was very disturbed at first. He went, how can you have the Bible next to the Quran and the Bhagavad Gita? I think that's where he had deliberately placed them. And the attorney told the guy from Texas that he'd like to see all viewpoints. He says, well, by the end of that long trial, only were together there for a couple of months, he says that guy was starting to thumb through the other things. And there were other things that this attorney had done in his office. He had deliberately mixed pictures of himself and his family with pictures of him and his colleagues. And that was both reminding him of how much friendship mattered and how much his family mattered, and that he always wanted to remember them. He also had a really wonderful collection of sayings, both serious questions about God, and one was just humorous ones. I don't remember them right now, but again, they're photographed. And then behind was a poem someone had written for him about not always being so dour and lightening up. That blew my mind. And I found lots more, just lots more. I find that when I think of workplace altars, what I'm thinking about is what you bring to your workspace to remind you, this is who I really am and this is what matters. For some people, it's simply the photographs of the family. And that's usually allowed. But I found other things, a lot of poetry, a lot of inspirational quotes. I particularly like to put little quotes on my day timer. I like to stick them into file for projects that need a lot of help. I have a lot in my marketing folder for myself. I have just found almost everything. Rarely candles, though. I'll often find little water fountains, bubbling fountains that are in many workplaces, and people enjoy them. The only rules I've seen about them is that whatever you put on your desk has to be for you. I've developed a whole kind of etiquette around that, for example, if I'm your supervisor, the last thing you want to see behind me is, and have to stare at during a meeting, is a representation of my religion, or even a representation of others' religions. For example, I love Buddhist art, but that would be the most inappropriate thing to put behind me, whether I'm Buddhist or not Buddhist. For me as a non-Buddhist, to put it up would be demeaning Buddhism, where I'm just using it as art in a public setting. And no person can push that faith on another person. that I've seen people deal with it very simply. For example, I saw a woman who was Jehovah's Witness at work, and she wanted to keep her devoted Jehovah's Witness materials on the desk. And they talked to her and says, fine, you can keep it on the part of the desk that faces you, but no, you can't keep them out on the platform where your work is picked up or put down. That's, that was more public. And she had been putting them there as kind of like a proselytizing tract. They said no, and I think that was absolutely appropriate. That, again, is another discussion. And I've talked with a number of attorneys about legal issues around spirituality and work, and that's a whole new opening field. But mainly what I've heard from attorneys around spirit and work is the same thing have heard from HR people, OD people, etiquette experts, is kindness and compassion always wins out. Respectfulness. And respectfulness means not the old golden rule of doing unto others the way I want to be done, but listening to them and asking how they want to be treated. I think that's much deeper and much richer.